Call the Osceola School Board Security Workshop to order. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I thought what we're going to do just for the record to help Tanya is we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves for the record. I'm Clarence Thacker, the school board.
Terry Castillo, School Board.
Robert Bass, School Board.
Sheriff Lopez with Osceola County Sheriff's Office.
Chief Deputy John Hayden, Osceola County Sheriff's Office.
Pam Wine, Sheriff's Office.
Jark Wales School Board.
Mike Steigerwald, City of Kissimmee.
Louis Wonders.
Pete Gauntlet, St. Cloud Police Department.
Jeff Odell, Kissimmee Police Department.
Beth Knight, Deputy County Manager.
Frank Krudenbacher, School Board Attorney.
Deborah Pace, Superintendent.
Okay, thank you very much. What I thought we would do today, I'm going to kind of reorder the topics. I think might make a little more sense, but Dr. Pace was going to give us a little recap first on the laws that were in place back in May of 2019 with the charter schools and the guardians versus SROs and deputies. And I was going to let her do that first, just to kind of set the stage for everybody, kind of where we're at there. And then I thought, I know Julius's group has done a good bit of stuff. Go through that presentation real quick and then move into the Guardian program I know y'all want to talk about and the proposal cost of the resource officers. Is that okay with everybody? That might get things in a little bit of an order. Dr. Payne?
Just for clarity, I wanted to remind everybody of the workshop that the school board had with security involved on May 21st of 2019. That was after Governor DeSantis signed Senate Bill 7030 in May of that year, which significantly altered the requirements and protocols that were first defined in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act 7026 in 2018. It required school boards and superintendents to partner with law enforcement agencies or security agencies to establish or assign one or more safe school officer at each school within the district, including charter schools. It directed school boards to collaborate with charter school governing boards to facilitate charter school access to all of the safe school officer options available in the law, or make up the difference in cost for providing a safe schools officer at each charter school and the charter school's per student share of the state safe schools allocation. The four options, it added a fourth option in 70 that was not in the original bill. So obviously the school resource officer is the first option. A school safety officer is a second option, which is a certified law enforcement officer with arrest powers, like an agency, so to speak. The school guardian, which is an employee of the school who volunteers or who is hired for that specific purpose and completes the psych evaluation and training that's required, or a school security guard employed by a security agency. It talks about the school guardian, school security guard trainings. They have to undergo similar training, a valid license to carry a concealed weapon, 144 hours of training, a psychological evaluation, drug test and subsequent random drug tests, and an ongoing training, weapon inspection, and firearm qualifications. It also talked about the fact that if a local sheriff did not want to provide guardian training, then a local school board or charter school governing board who made a decision to implement one, the local sheriff would be obligated to contract with the sheriff in a neighboring county who would agree to provide that particular training. So it kind of changed the impetus of where the decision-making body happens, not the local sheriff, but actually the school board. And at the time, this board said we would open up those options to all of our charter schools, but recommend and highly suggest that everyone do a school resource officer. So I just wanted to make that clarification so that everybody understands the potential impact of any changes and decisions that we make as we work through the process today.
And to be clear, that is the current practice that we have. It's a strong recommendation, but they can make their own choice, which gives us the relief from having to fund.
Correct.
By mandate.
Particularly for our smallest charter schools that based on enrollment do not earn enough in the safe schools allocation to pay for a school resource officer.
Real quick, what's our smallest charter school in terms of student body,
I believe it's still Lincoln Marty.
which is 100 students?
It has been, I can't tell you the exact numbers today. Shauna? 45 FTE. They have
45?
They also have a VPK program as well, so they've got about 100 students in the building. It's right over here off of Fortune Road. But their per student share of the Safe Schools allocation is less than $10,000.
Gotcha, okay.
That's all I have.
With that, Julius, I think several of y'all have been involved with, Julius put together a citizens advisory committee. I just kind of want to hear what that outcome is from my viewpoint, because I'm not up to speed at all on what's been done there. And I think, Julius, if you can walk us through this fairly quickly. My hope today is too, I know this is blocked for 2 hours. I'm hoping we're not here 2 hours. I think everybody's got something else they could do too. So hopefully we'll move through this and get where we need to go. So,
Thank you, Chairman Thacker. I did remove some of the findings, just to make it a summary recommendation. We have the full supporting documents online. I just want to again thank, the different chiefs, for coming out, and I appreciate your participation. I appreciate the sheriff's office as well. I know Major Weiss was in each one of the meetings. And so, the community advisory board was made up of a lot of different diverse folks that wanted to really participate. They had good backgrounds in law enforcement, some had no experience at all. And so we just really wanted a cross-section. And I just really want to say, even though I'm the one doing the talking, it was a collaborative document. This document wasn't just me, it was everybody, it was input, I know the chief said, kind of give us a little bit of pullback on certain items. But I just want to reiterate that this is a collaborative effort, that even Dr. Pace came to every meeting. I think Terry Castillo even hosted a public forum as well. That was online, and so I was able to watch the video online, and some of the ideas made it into recommendation. I guess the last disclaimer is, when I was talking to Chief Odell, he mentioned some of these recommendations have already been implemented. So it's not here to say that, it's kind of really to validate what's going on, because we didn't just want to look at forward and missing items. We look at it as, what does the ideal scenario look like with an SRO in our schools? So this is more like a document that's saying, this is what we want it to look like. And some of the things, maybe even half of them, have already been implemented, and it's just letting us know that, hey, this is the right course of action. So without further ado, I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I'm just going to kind of go over every item, and then we can kind of discuss it at the end. But the number one thing that we recommended was simple, was not having a vision statement or a mission statement. Just like how every, police officers, say to protect and to serve, to have like a goal to kind of keep everyone focused. And so we thought that would be interesting as well, to have the school SRO system have its own mission statement and vision statement to kind of give, the officers a purpose for being there, just kind of reminding the community, what that role is. Number 2.1 is basically the finding that, originally when the SRO was made, when Chief Fountain had mentioned that, it was before all the school shootings. And they used to give classes, on the DARE program, how to, not be involved in gang activity and those natures. But after the school shootings, it became more of a security role, and they kind of got out of the classroom. Now, that doesn't say that 100% of the officers don't give classes anymore, but I think we even had our first security meeting where there was general consensus that they wouldn't mind getting back in. So that's kind of the idea, is that, throughout the school year, there's always slow academic days, like the day before winter break, the day before summer, spring break, the last day of school. There's different opportunities for that officer to go into the class and teach like a 15-minute course. So that's really what recommendation 2.2 is for. And then I went through one of the schools, they had like an old SRO coloring book, this is the sheriff's office. And so the elementary school kids can maybe get like an updated book that says, hey kids, this is what to do. And then for the high schools, since they're a little bit more too cool for a book, but we can actually give them like a reference sheet. And that reference sheet can be like, there's a lot of dating violence, there's a lot of sexual assault. We talked about earlier, I know Board Member Castillo was talking about the Title IX issues and people being able to report, crimes or incidents that may have happened, not only on campus, but to our students off campus. And so that SRO may be that avenue for them to reach somebody, because they may be too afraid to go to a police officer on the street and say, hey, I think I was, molested or something like that. And here, if they're on campus and they have that relationship with that SRO established, they can feel more comfortable to be able to outreach to them and let them know what their concerns are. So that's basically what recommended, the 2.1 to 2.3 kind of do. Recommended 3.1, it actually exists in the SRO contract that we have with the city of Kissimmee and St. Cloud, but the sheriff's office doesn't really have it there. And that is that we're not disciplinarians. So that's something that already existed. And so we talked about the possibility from the task force's perspective is kind of outlining what they are. Because there's certain things that we have to report to the state no matter what. So if an incident occurs, there's no leeway, we have to report it to the state of Florida. And then there's some things that we believe that we can teach internally, the school board can do it, is, say, hey, the little Johnny's, squirming in his seat, then we shouldn't have to call the SRO right away. We should be able to call our own dean and be able to handle that discipline issue. Because again, going back to one of the origins of the SRO program was to create a positive relationship with students and staff and the police officers or the deputies. So that way they don't have this negative impression of them. So the goal is to try not to use the SRO as a crutch whenever there's discipline problems, but to kind of have a clear line of demarcation of when to call them and when not to call them. And then we thought too that there should be some items in there that should be at the discretion. We don't want to say, okay, you never call the SRO, always call it. There's some things in there that kind of like are up to the discretion of each person or each administration at the school. And so that's what basically 3.1 is. 4.1 is this is interesting because I visited Gateway High School yesterday, and man, you talk about young folks and phenomenal. And so I told them that we don't always want to report negative things. When you create an incident log, I used to work security back in the day, and we used to have to say, okay, we reported on this hour, we did this and that. The issue is that, and I'm trying to come up with an idea that doesn't overburden them with too much paperwork. But whenever a positive incident occurs, and I'm giving a silly example, but a student lost their wallet once and they couldn't find it. They went to the SRO went around, found it, and the kid was really happy. That doesn't make an incident report, and so that's something that I want to be able to emphasize, that positive incidents can be reported just as much as negative. So that way, again, it breaks the stereotype, but also it justifies what the SRO is doing, because the chief did mention at one of the last meetings, Chief Odell mentioned that there's only so many incidents being reported at the schools compared to what's at the street. But what happens is, a lot of it is internalized. We only call, the SRO only calls you guys, the outside, to come in if there's like a bomb threat, a gun thing, like something serious. But when there's small things that are being handled by that SRO, they don't get reported up to you guys, to the chain, so you don't know. So it seems like they're just kind of sitting there watching cameras all day. That's not the case, because I'm telling you right now, as doing this report, I visited a lot of campuses, and they're moving and grooving. They're doing lunch, duty. They're making sure the cafeteria is okay. They're giving kids, toys and presents and participating in activities. They're assisting coaches and stuff. So the point with that is that there's a lot of things that the SRO is doing on campus that may not be visible on paper that's showing up. So if they can create some kind of log to indicate what they're doing, so that way they can kind of justify themselves. Because not that they need to justify themselves, but from an outside observer's perspective, they can look at that and say, wow, that SRO is truly a value add to the campus. So here it's 5. Oh, and we talked about this before. I know the Sheriff Lopez had mentioned it too, and I thought it was a great idea, so I put it in here. We do morning announcements at the school. And one of the findings was, again, we were talking about it earlier, they kind of relate to each other, is, more people need to know who the SRO is on campus. And so that way they can feel comfortable to approach them whenever there's bullying incidents or things of that nature. So we have a PA system. Most schools have either a broadcast television network, or they do it on the intercom and they do morning announcements. And we kind of just suggested that maybe once a week, it doesn't have to be every single day, we do a security update and say, hey kids, this is what's going on, whatever. I don't want to put words in their mouth. I'm not here to micromanage the whole deal. But the scenario is that the SRO can be more visible and be a part of the campus life, not just kind of be an appendage to it. So that's kind of what that is. And then 5.2 talks about orientation itself, that when we, at the beginning of the school year, we ask the children or the kids to go meet with their parents to meet the teacher. And so that way they can ask them questions about what their expectations are. We think that it should be the same for the SRO. So not only do you meet your teacher, you have a chance to meet your principal, but we think that the checkbox should be, hey, the SRO's in the cafeteria, you can meet with them, you can hand out business cards, or she can hand out business cards, and they can say, hey kids, just to let you know, parents, this is the expectations. We want little Johnny to be a good boy, or we want little Jane to be a great woman. And so please, these are the expectations. And if there's any resources to hand out at the beginning of the school year, you can do that. Again, it's just an opportunity to meet the children as much as possible without being a negative interaction. it's reinforcing that. And so, and basically 5.3 and 5.4 discuss the same thing, just more opportunities to be able to interact with them. We have a website on every single page, we have a homepage with the principal picture and a message. We thought the same thing could be there for the SRO, so we can know where the SRO is, because sometimes the SRO is on our website, but you have to click on administration or staff, and it takes like 4 or 5 clicks to get to them, and you gotta know the name, because sometimes it's a directory, and if you don't know the last name, so we thought it'd be great to put the SRO front and center on the homepage, and then maybe even having another button that says, hey, you wanna report a crime, or if you're being bullied or something like that, even though that's already present on the website, a redundant button doesn't hurt, because sometimes you don't know where people are gonna visit on the website. So if you see the SRO, you have the ability to report something, and it's an online report, so that way it's nice and simple. 6.2 was the issue that we had to, this is a recommendation, this is harder to mandate, but this is something that we wanted, and the reality is, this is the body cameras. Now, we believe that, the task force strongly believes that the body camera should be like a standard issue. It's like, we don't negotiate to have a gun, we don't negotiate to have, a taser or a flashlight. There's certain things that are just standard issue, and we believe that is the case. And so, we understand that St. Cloud does it 100% of their officers and SROs. Chief Odell mentioned that he's gonna go ahead and do that, and then Major Weiss mentioned that they're gonna try to do that, but they have some funding challenges, and we don't know when to implement it. So I'm not here in this task force to say, you gotta do it, here's a hard, fast deadline. It's more aspirational in nature, saying this is what we would like, and we're willing to work together. Because during the task force meeting, when the funding became an issue, we showed them that we were able to talk to our legislators and maybe get a special grant, or that's why we're here now, to talk to the county administration, that maybe we can help them out, or however it looks. This recommendation isn't to prescribe it on how it gets implemented. It's more like saying, we believe that it should be a part of the program, and we believe every officer that's interacting with the community should have that, and the camera protects both sides. Because when I was doing my homework, I saw some statistics showing that the number of frivolous suits and complaints actually reduced. Because a lot of people were just complaining to the officer, they did this to me, they did that to me. But then when the camera system got implemented, the number of frivolous complaints went down. So that's something that we kind of stand by. How it gets implemented, that's the pleasure of the board. That's also the agencies. The point is, we want to work together, but we strongly believe that should be a standard issue of the uniform. 7.1 is more for the state of Florida, because we have SRO basic training as a requisite locally. So, and everybody does that, and that was the impression that we were under for the task force, is that the sheriffs and both law enforcement agencies, the police departments, required basic training before they assigned them to a school. So we thought that was something that should be statewide. So, because the task force was already doing the work, and we had State Representative Placencia and Senator Victor Torres, present at our task force meetings, and we thought that requirement of having a 40-hour basic training course where they can get more detailed, training specifically on campus was something that we believed in. So that's what 7.1 is. 8.1s or the 8s are basically professional development courses, and we have the Criminal Justice Academy. And so I've kind of walked through there because they were part of the task force too. They were advisors, they weren't like official members. But it's just basically saying that whatever courses that we offer for the school district, we would like to extend that hand to the deputies as well. And like for instance, I know at Parton Settlement, we have a deaf and hard of hearing program. And so sign language really isn't appropriate for every single deputy. So for the deputy assigned to that school, they have a high population of deaf and hard of hearing. We thought it was appropriate for them to learn it. Now, not as a mandate, but to offer that course, because we offer that course to all of our teachers. Because the sign language students don't just stay in that class. They move around to the cafeteria, they go to different places, and we thought it was a good idea to give them that course. And so that's basically what 8.1 is saying, that, and here's the other beautiful thing about our program for professional development, is we can create our own courses. I didn't realize that. I thought it was like a fixed course catalog that you choose from. So if the deputies want to actually teach a course, or you guys want to create a course on lockdown procedures, or security situational awareness, or anything like that, defensive tactics, if a teacher really wants to learn defensive tactics, hey, you guys have access to our professional development courses. You can create your own content, and we can make sure that our staff, has access to those programs as well. So it's a two-way street. 9.1 is more for you guys, because, the finding itself shows that the state of Florida has the Attorney General's office and FDLE where they work together and they have security practitioner designations. So there's like SRO basic, there's advanced, there's intermediate, there's advanced certifications essentially that aren't on here but in the full report. And so we were just floating the idea that if an officer takes the time to go to intermediate and advanced training, that they get recognized. Because a lot of times, it's hard to say, we want you to be all this training and not get paid for it. But that, I didn't wanna get into the details, because I know Chief Odell mentioned that they're unionized and maybe it's a part of their promotion program, or if we give them an annual stipend. The point is that the recommendation is if an officer takes the time to get these advanced training, that we believe that there should be some kind of incentive for them to do that and acknowledging them. So, trying to go as fast as I can here.
Keep moving, Julius, come here.
All right.
Hey, Julius, I got a question. I mean, your task force, I was impressed with and did a phenomenal job. This document that we have has each recommendation and has a very detailed, I understand all the recommendations. I mean, can we just kind of summarize each one, then ask if there's questions for each one, rather than, I mean, you're doing a phenomenal job, but it's just like, you're going into a lot of detail and it's already written here. So I just for time's sake.
And I have an additional question, I'm so sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Bass.
No, you go ahead.
Was this sent out to law enforcement ahead of time, so that
Everybody
they've
get a chance
already
to review
reviewed
it?
it? Okay.
And I already reviewed it, but you're a part of the task force too.
Okay.
The complete document, oh, this is
just came to me
condensed?
last night,
Oh, what was taken, I read this, what was taken out?
when they
I
talked
guess
about the findings for each part and ahead of the recommendation. So
We
this
saw
is
something like
gonna
this
Yeah, we
was redacted,
we looked at, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
because I wanted to summarize it really quickly, because I didn't wanna be here all day, so,
Gotcha.
but basically, the recommendations were tied to the findings. Like there was an issue and we kind of described it.
Gotcha, okay.
And there may be a couple of points that I'm gonna have a different,
a different version,
yes.
based on conversations after,
And
I
if
understand,
we wanna get caught up real quick, if I may.
yes.
7.1, we don't always give the basic SRO before they become an SRO, so we generally get that accomplished in the summer.
Okay,
Through their conference, and so if, say, for whatever reason, an officer was transferred out of the unit and we had to replace them, they may not have the training and school starts next week,
oh,
so.
right,
But it is our goal each summer to make sure that our SROs get that basic training. And then we did talk about, it's a union issue, if we just pay our SROs a stipend for any kind of, like, if they went to the DHH training, but they do get compensation through the state, and obviously the city pays it, but for career advanced training. So, and that's across the board for all officers, so that was just my 2 points of clarification. Yeah.
Yeah, and also too, we mentioned that if they're not permanently assigned to a school and there's somebody covering it, that they don't have to have 40-hour basic training. It's only those that are permanently assigned to the school. So does anybody have any,
Questions
in the
up-
workshop we go over, but I
up-
understand it's
any
so long.
questions
Is
up
there
to
any,
now?
does anybody have any objections? Look at it that way. Does anyone have any objections to them, to any of the recommendations? So that way, if there's an issue, then we can address it now. If not, then we can try to incorporate it into the SRO contracts that we do for the following year.
I don't think I do, but I need to.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is just a workshop now. I mean,
Yeah, no,
this is the initial time you've seen it, but just as an opportunity to.
I mean, if it's worth anything, although I did read the complete document, and I know that there's changes here, so I'll have to review this again. I do think that this is a partnership, so I would really like our law enforcement to have a chance to really review this and then give us feedback. Because a lot of the recommendations that are set forth here have to do with managing staff that we don't manage. It's their employees. So, I mean, that's where I'm at. I don't know what anybody else is, but if they, they definitely have a chance to review it, and then I would welcome any feedback from them.
I mean, they were part of the task force, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So none of this is a surprise.
Now, I'm ready to talk on a couple of things.
Yep.
Okay, let's keep going, yeah.
We'll do that, you wanna move to that then, Julius?
Yeah, I'm fine if they want to say
Okay.
that instead of, because you're right, because it is there, it just mainly in workshops,
Yeah, no, that's-
And it's spelled out very well, very nicely, they did a good
Discuss
job.
all of this because we didn't get this document till we sat down.
That's what I'm
so.
saying.
Well, that's on the
Not
summer.
everybody's
so-
got the document ahead
This
of
is a
time.
surprise, so. And before we make any decisions, on any recommendations that, that civilian board has, we really have to look into it, because remember, we are responsible for the security and safety of this county. And we respect the recommendations of anybody, they're welcome, but ultimately, we're gonna make the decisions on how we police our schools and how we maintain the safety in this county. We just have to have that understanding. Educational board is one thing, we maintain safety. I've got two very experienced chiefs that are guiding me, and they're very wise. Decisions that they're making as a group, I do believe they are 1,000% in the best interest of the safety of our community, and we're gonna continue to talk about these things. But a lot of this, definitely we have to review it, because, a lot of these things are pretty on paper, but in the real world, they're gonna be told a different story.
Chief Odell, you got some comments you want?
Yes, sir. And so I'm in kind of a weird position, so as part of the advisory board, and then, but also speaking on behalf of law enforcement.
Sure.
And so I would like to say right up front, even though I will be speaking against a couple of recommendations, I was very honored and appreciative of Mr. Melendez and the task force invited me to be a part of it. Anything that I may be in an opposition of is not a reflection of the
Sure.
hard work that they
Nope.
did. And, many people complain, but there's a small fraction of our community that will actually get involved for the greater good, so I appreciate every minute of that. I just, a couple of things to point out with the Explorers program, that was something that I brought up in the first meeting that KPD had already had.
What number is that?
Yeah, is that in a reference to one of these?
One,
It's what?
11.1.
11.1,
Page
okay.
6.
Yep, got it.
That when the first night I did a presentation, talked about kind of the history of SRO, and then talked about that this was a new training initiative that we were starting to, traditionally, we do our defensive tactics or our de-escalation training, and we match up adults of similar size, and we're trying to protect our officers and their joints and stuff when we're doing our maneuvers. An unintended consequence is the officers get that built into their memory that it takes this much force for me to be able to handle this guy or control him. And that's what's in our memory. In our use of force, we ask our officers under the reasonability standard to factor in people's age and size and those things, but we don't give them an opportunity to train it. So we've rethought it. We've got Explorers, the curriculum's already set up that they do basic police maneuvers, handcuffing, they role play for each other. So we're bringing them in and training with our officers. It's a very controlled environment. We're doing the basics right now, but we're getting our officers used to starting with verbal and then even going into some, basic handcuffing and or controlling where they put their hands on them, but they're doing it with students and because our Explorers are middle and high school. And so we're getting that muscle memory built up that, we're actually letting them see what that feels like, so that, we can apply it in a real life situation.
Yeah.
And, there are, not everybody's gonna do it. I think we're the first agency I've ever heard of that did it, and not sure why we didn't think of it before, but there is some liability. You're involving kids with adults, and so it's gotta be very controlled. Sorry, I thought we were gonna go through all this. On this one, do we take out the demographics?
It was just a simple recommendation, we took out the finding there. I mean, no, the finding's there in the official report, this is just a summary, this doesn't replace the actual report is there, but I just thought for the purposes of being here, nobody wanted to walk through 42 pages of,
Right.
things like that, we just made the recommendation.
I don't know how to reference it
See if,
without the original document.
did you?
I think it was just basically reviewing,
No?
I'm
Oh, so
sorry,
then I just read it online.
15.1?
yeah, 15.1, just each agency can increase its efforts to recruit and retain a diversified workforce that better reflects the demographics.
Okay, and so I just wanted to point out in the full document, it has the demographics provided by the school board. I believe Dr. Pace provided that, and so people aren't gonna do the math, so I just wanna point out that KPD is Just over 50% of our SROs are Hispanic, and although just over 50% doesn't actually match the demographic of our community, it is the majority and that matches our community. If we have one more African American SRO, we're gonna be over the demographics in our community. And that has been a cornerstone of our recruiting philosophy. I won't say the name or the station, but I was recently asked a question from a reporter that's gonna be doing a story. And KPD is an anomaly in Central Florida and how closely they match the demographics of their city. So I just wanted to throw that out, that that was kind of left in the generality. Wish I had.
It was online, it was appended to our agenda, our school board agenda for this week.
We're gonna get a copy of it,
Yeah.
or a couple copies.
Actually, I can probably look it up.
So I think those are the main ones that you.
The agenda's still up.
That I remember. So one of them I do wanna mention, because I know we're short on time, but, the attorney Crump, you know, in the case at Liberty High School, had made a recommendation that whatever program we use, he wanted the officer to be outside of the campus. And so I just thought, 16.1 is the one that references it, why we don't believe that that's effective. Because basically, the SRO has, access to our data. They can go to the detentions, at the end of school and talk to the kids, like, look, guys, you remember in detention, we have in-school suspension, we have different programs. And if the officer is outside of the campus, they won't be able to have that interaction. So that's basically what 16.1 is doing. That was a finding, in response to having SROs outside the campus.
Tell me what you mean outside the campus?
Well, I didn't really make the recommendation, it was.
No, I don't.
They meant like physically be
Outside, right?
outside, not be on campus grounds, like maybe hang out, like maybe on the perimeter, and if something were to happen, like an active shooter incident, then they would go inside of it. But basically, that they would not be inside of the school, they would be outside of the school and only called upon to go inside when it is in the.
I'm not sure I'm following that, because about the first 5 recommendations were having them involved in the school stuff, in classes and so.
Correct, and so we recommended against that.
Oh,
So
okay,
that's the
okay,
reason
I'm
why,
sorry.
it was just a finding, because.
I'm
the
with
attorney
you,
had
I
mentioned
understand, that's what I didn't
and
understand.
we actually recommended against it, and so those are
Okay.
the reasons outlined. But I just
Okay.
wanted to highlight that.
I'm with you now, that makes,
That's the reason why, because you're probably like, why is the task force discussing an SRO being outside of the campus?
Right.
It's because they had mentioned it, and I thought out of due respect, because he is an attorney and, very prominent, I wanted to address him directly and let him know that we are against that as a task force, and for the reasons outlined in 16.1.
Sure.
You shouldn't respect any attorney, Mr. Moore.
I try to, this task force tried to be a true cross-section of everything,
no, that's fine, I understand that. what
We
you're
wanted
saying.
everyone's opinion to be heard.
And then the last one was, I just wanted to speak briefly, if I may, on finding 20, that will tie into finding 14. And so, finding 20, I just would like to offer a little different perspective.
Finding 20.
Based on rumor mill. Sorry, finding 20 was talking about the fact that I'll ask for a meeting with Dr. Pace so that we can get a audience in front of the school board to talk about the Guardian program. And so between rumor mill or what may have been reported on the news, felt like, production was orchestrated. And so exactly what happened was this is 180 from where I was, for those of you that were here back when we originally talked about this. Our perfect world was we wanted SROs in the school. The reality of the situation, just a few weeks ago now, was talking with staff and our legal advisor to get started on the contracts with the charter schools. Because their individual contracts, they take a while to get back, and then they have to go to our commission to be approved for the mayor to sign. And so we wanted to get started on those. The fact that we were bringing in body cameras now and committing that to SROs, what part of that cost were we gonna attach to the contract? And then with that, I asked for the stats and the impact of the SRO program on the agency. And it was a slap in the face, kind of a reality check of what the impact sustaining that entire program was on the rest of the agency. And my staff was more grinning and bearing it because they knew how I felt originally, that wanted SROs in the schools, so they just were dealing with it. Well, you know, the reality of the situation is it's having a huge impact on the rest of the operations of our agency. And if you look at any unit within law enforcement that has an established minimum staffing, so this is absolute, this takes a minimum of this many officers, and that's required every single day, and that generally starts in patrol. And so let's say for KPD, if we've got an area that says minimum staffing at any time during the day is 10 officers to cover this assigned area of responsibility. Well, that really, we've got to factor in, we have to have a relief factor attached to that. So that's really 1.4 officers for every one officer, so that, you know, somebody's there for vacations or training and things of that nature. So that's 14 officers to handle that one patrol area. Well, now we apply that to the SRO, our absolute minimum. And so our unit is 16, but I'll take the supervisor out of it. So we've got to have 15 students in a class, and that is, or in each school, and that is our absolute minimum. We have no extra staffing built in. We have no relief factor, and that's going to probably take another 4 or 5 officers, and that's a huge expense. So every time we add an officer, that's $135,000 year one. We get reimbursed 46. A little bit more than that, we get salary and benefits from the charter school, but it's a huge impact to obviously our budget. And we are still catching up from the initial, you know, we added 9 positions to fulfill this new Public Safety Act when it started, our School Safety Act, and we're still playing catch up from trying to add that staffing. So you gave us the money today for 4 or 5 new officers, it's gonna take us a few years to catch up because we're still dealing with our natural attrition in the police department as it goes. And so we have covered more, on average, more than 1 school every school day. We have a supervisor assigned to the SRO, and 25% of her time is filling in schools. So that's 25% of the time that she's not being a supervisor, not meeting with the principals or the school administration, or inspecting what we expect of our SROs and checking in on them. So that is an impact to her duties. And so it is having, we have to pull officers from the street, we have to pull them, detectives from their cases to cover schools, and so it is a huge impact. The charter schools, if you go schools overboard, and I know our SROs mean a whole lot more than what they're there for, traditional police-related things. But the traditional police-related calls for service, how we justify staffing, the schools in total are 3% of our calls for service across the city. The charter schools represent only 14% of that 3%, so very minimal. Now, we have to understand too that the SRO program's been established and how they report for years and years, and how they deal with law enforcement when they call them in. So certainly more things are being reported in the public schools than probably in the charter schools, just because of where we're at in the program. But it does have a significant impact. Charter schools can rent a storefront and be open in 6 months. And
Right.
best case scenario, if I give a green light to hire an officer today, it's a year. Best case scenario before we actually realize that body in our staffing. So we don't have the time to plan. And even when they build a school, I mean, the science charter, that's a giant facility, and it was done in less than a year, I believe. And so it does have a major impact. And so with that, I said, you know what, it's time that I gotta be realistic. And so I called Chief Gotlet, Sheriff Lopez, and we had a conversation. We're in a very good position. I'm proud to say, my boss is here, so I'm, gonna, suck up a little bit, but I do talk about it often. We're the only agency I know in Central Florida is not chasing our workload. So our staffing is ahead of the game. And I can give you an example. Calls for service in 2014 were 44,000 and change. In 2019 and 20, and I include 19 because 20 was a COVID year, but they were both around 39 and 40,000. So it's come down 10%, but our staffing's gone up 17%. So we're in a great position, and it's affecting us. And so I know it's affecting our neighboring agencies. And then if you look at the size of the sheriff's office SRO program, it's huge, part of their organization. Ours represents 10%. So with that, we all were in agreement that we need to sit down and discuss it. The established protocol over the years is anytime we have something that is gonna affect policy, we go through Dr. Pace to then ask for an audience with the school board. That's what we do, that's what we've done, it's been established. Some of you longer-term board members know that we've had those meetings. We've had closed doors meetings before, but I felt like this was pushed out, that it was some secret meeting and Dr. Pace is listed on this finding or her name's on it, and I just didn't feel like it was fair. It was I started it, it should have been the focus of me. The one thing that I'm guilty of, and I admitted it to the group, was that I was not sensitive to the rest of the advisory board. But I felt it that night, I still feel it today, it's not a purview of the advisory board. That this was an operational decision made by 3 agency heads, and we need to come to the decision-making group to talk about it. They felt differently, and that's okay. We can have a difference of opinion, but there was nothing sneaky. There was nothing violated sunshine law. The other things that I heard or was asked, from the media, absolutely didn't happen. So, without going too much further into that, I will point out if we go to 14, when we talked about that in our meeting, that we were going through a program that was outlined in Tennessee. And we were kind of going down what they did. And one of the recommendations was a soft uniform. So that was the same meeting, we talked about that. Then it got to a discussion, the next line was involving the principals in the selection process. And actually Chairman Montero spoke up first and said he was not in favor of the idea and gave his rationale. Then I came in after him and I said, I'm in agreement. Philosophically, it's a wonderful idea. Logistically, it's very difficult. Have 100 different principals with 100 different ideals on what they expect from their SRO. You've got personality things. Doesn't mean we can't get there, but it's going to be, it's difficult to do, and it's not like we have 10 people putting in for every SRO position. We may have a couple of officers. I can't speak for the other 2 agencies, but we have people that are interested, but it's not, severely outnumbering the actual opening that we have. So if we have 1 or 2 people and the principal doesn't feel like they click, then we're starting off in a negative, I feel already. So those are the concerns. The discussion ended there. So then now I fast forward and presented on the final night was this recommendation that came from, I believe only 1 board member watching a live stream from a town hall. Again, very good information, but there was not an opportunity for the group to discuss it before it was presented as a final recommendation. Now, we did discuss it a little bit that night. Everybody approved moving forward with it. But I point that out that we all kind of made some decisions there, and I don't think this is the end of the world, and I know certainly we did not violate any policy or protocol or any laws.
Yeah.
And so I just, wanted to point that out, and Dr. Pace is, we have a wonderful working relationship with her. I won't name names, but I talked to law enforcement agency heads from all over, and not everybody enjoys the professional relationship, the responsiveness, the collaboration that we enjoy here with our superintendent. And so I just wanted to go on record that I'm very appreciative of all she does, and then how much she does to work with law enforcement. She has every minute that I've been down here if she's been in her position. So with that, I'm quiet. Thank
Hey,
you.
Chief, real quick, on the clarification on 14.1 with the principal being involved, that was the one where Dolores McMillan was a part of town hall being hosted in part by board member Castillo. And I think Chairman Montero was under the impression that they interview separate. Like you have some companies, you interview one person, then you go to another person to another person. And so when I told him that, it would be a panel. And so for instance, it would be say you, your HR director, and then maybe a school principal or a superintendent designee. And that way they can be a part of the process to ask them questions. And so we made it real clear that the final hiring authority still rests with the law enforcement agency. But we just felt that, just like most companies, they'll have a department head go there. HR doesn't just hire anyone. They usually have HR plus somebody that's in that department, because they know the specific questions that they may have to address. And so that way, that was the concern, was to have them be a part of the panel and ask questions and just kind of see if they're a natural fit. So it wasn't to become a hiring authority. And so I think that's where the modification, the 14.1 came from. And so it's not to be the hiring authority, and they should take away
I
the
think we
power,
kinda-
it's just to be a part of the panel to ask some additional questions. and see if they're-
My point was just that was a private discussion and not with the group before it was recommended. So I was pointing out that the allegations made about.
Okay, that's something different. I'm just talking
was-
about 14.1
was
right now.
exactly what happened here. So,
Chairman, this
Let's-
is non-binding though, right?
No, I'm sorry, these are
Yeah,
recommendations.
it's up to the school board to accept or reject.
Even then, they're still just recommendations,
Sure.
right, as they're titled, right? So none of this is binding.
No, the school board could take them all, could take one, could take none.
Okay,
Mr.
so,
Chairman, let me clarify one thing.
Yeah.
The school board can accept this and say they want all this. Ultimately, law enforcement has to say,
Correct, yeah, there's a lot of these are not out of our, we can't tell them how to hire and how, so we're not,
yeah, so I think there's a much bigger issue. I respect the both of you tremendously. I know of your history. I think even in public, I've said it. I think that you guys do a tremendous job. I'm looking forward to the sheriff also doing as well good of a job as you guys are. I think that the elephant in the room though right now is the Guardian program, right? And the conversation that took place. So for me, the fact that you guys went into a room, you spoke with Dr. Pace, no issue. The idea that the policy is hashed out with the superintendent beforehand though, that kind of gets tricky, right? Because there's a separation of roles here. So I just want to make my position clear. I am not a security expert. But I was writing just thoughts, about this morning. So here's the thing. One, there was quite a question about whether the charter schools were requesting this or not. So is it the charter schools that asked for this or not?
it is my understanding charter schools have asked, not of us, they've asked of the school board superintendent, I'm not sure where that was, asked the school system or administration about the opportunity in the past. This today was absolutely brought forward by law enforcement.
Okay.
And John, don't forget, when we started, they have a strong recommendation to use a uniformed
Who
SRO,
does?
the charter school. They have the right to follow their own path.
Right,
So just,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That was my understanding.
right, that's correct.
So, just as a basic thing here, number one, I think to remove SROs from any school is a punishment on people that are choosing charter schools, right? Just as a basic principle, right? Which I think is completely wrong. I think that budget and student security are not equal priorities. I think that I'm very interested in what your bosses have to say, because they'll lose their jobs if you guys take police out of our school district. And I think that even the sheriff is gonna be in a tight situation if we take SROs off of school campuses, right? And I'm not saying that as a political statement, I'm saying it as that's the ramifications of doing something that I can't imagine any parent would want. I would not send my kid to a school without an SRO. So for me, this is a very dicey situation. To be fair to the community also, in terms of the discussion of having it privately, this is very quick, right? You guys had a conversation when was it, Dr. Pace?
We met on,
Last week or the week prior,
April
right? So in a
22nd.
couple of weeks. I haven't had a chance, and then I didn't hear about it until I got the email, right? So now, I have to go back to the community and I have to find out. Maybe I'm the only one with a problem with it. That's definitely a possibility. But I'm worried that I'm not gonna be the only one. And instead of trying to resolve the problem, which is my nature, resolve the problem of the budget, we're resolving the problem by killing the body. We're not removing the cancer, we're just killing the person here with Guardians. And I don't know what Guardians Maybe, and I'm not speaking ill of any guardians and any programs or anything, but I think the sense of security that people get from having a police officer on campus is much different than having a security guard, right? As Julia said, he was a security guard a long time ago, okay? And no offense, I love him like a brother, but I don't want him guarding my kids. I want you guarding my kids, right? It's just, in my opinion, it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility. The sheriff just said that this is a law enforcement issue. I disagree. Because if you guys were telling me, and again, I'm no expert, but if you guys told me that you guys are gonna pull your guys out of our schools, then my recommendation would be that we start our own police force, because we want people in uniform, deputies on campus. Maybe the rest of the board doesn't feel that way, I heard a gasp, but the fact is, I want a police officer at every school, and I think that the community will want that too, and I think they're gonna speak to that. So, I mean, and to be honest, I think that you guys should be just as invested as having police officers on school as we are. So,
And that's the benefit of having the county managers here too, and say, because the other reality is the population is growing. So I think what it is putting a strain on the current workforce to man the streets.
Can
So,
we,
but we don't wanna, oh yeah, that's, I guess, the next item.
yeah, can we bring this kind of back to the agenda? There's two items on the agenda which I think may actually go together, which is the Guardian Program for charter schools and proposed calls for the school resource officers. I've got a feeling those two are completely, I don't quite know, I'm not as up to speed on where this has come from, and Chief Adele, I don't know if this is kind of,
Yeah,
you're,
I don't wanna hog the whole thing.
no, we wanna know I wanna know what y'all are thinking about this, because I mean, I have an assumption, but I'd rather know
And
that.
it is, certainly cost comes in, but our city and cities and county officials, when this started, committed to funding the program. So while that is a part of it, that is not what is driving this today. So, and I promise you, in a perfect world, I want SROs in schools. But when, we get the input from the community, that is valuable. This is not law enforcement when I started 35 years ago, when nobody could tell us how to better patrol your neighborhood than us. Now we solicit those partnerships and input from the community so that we can provide you with the best strategy. But when we're getting input from the community, then that's based on feelings and perceptions and common sense and those, and that's where we were almost 3 school years ago, when we had no idea. This was thrown on us, and we went with our feelings and our preferences and our common sense and said, we want to put police officers in schools as SROs. Well, now we're in a different position. We're almost 3 school years later, and we're seeing the impact on our agency, and we're responsible for our entire communities, and we're pulling resources to staff this, and it can grow very quickly that we can't keep up with it. Now we've got to say we need to reassess. And, I think the balance of scales has to tip to those that are charged with the responsibility of staffing law enforcement agencies and deploying their resources to best protect our entire communities. It doesn't mean that we're trying to punish anybody, or I hate the fact that we are here, but the reality of the situation is what it is, and we can't continue with this trend because it's impacting operations. And almost 3 school years later, we're seeing every county all of our neighbors, school districts have had Guardian programs, and they've been successful. And across our state, there's multiple school districts that have these Guardian programs. So we're coming now from a different perspective of 3 years of seeing successful programs, 3 years of living the staffing part of it, and now we're coming to you all and saying, we're being as responsible as we can. We can't maintain this program as it sits today. That doesn't mean we're gonna discard our charter schools. that's gonna be a requirement of the supervisor, and they're gonna have to still check in on those schools, and we're not gonna throw away those relationships that we've established. We are gonna continue those relationships. It's just not gonna be with that SRO in the school every single day is our recommendation. So
Ms. Castillo, wait a minute, Ms. Castillo, is that a?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief Odell, for giving us like a comprehensive overview of how you came to this decision. It's very hard. I was sitting in your seat 3 years ago. It was like one of my first, big meetings, and I was like, we are not putting guardians in any school, point blank. I was not changing my mind. So I don't think there's anyone here that understands how difficult having this conversation even is for some of us, especially those who were, who experienced the protests from the community asking for SROs to be in our schools. And we made a decision as a community, because it wasn't just the school board, it was law enforcement, it was the county commission, the city officers were all here, and we committed to this program. So I understand that there's a lot invested in this emotionally as well as financially. And I've never been a proponent of having guardians. I think anybody in the community knows that from me. However, understanding where you're coming from, I think that we would be remiss to not even discuss what that means. I don't know what a guardian program means. I don't know what the training the training requirements. I don't know what jurisdiction-wise, what that would mean. What does that mean for the children? I need to know more about that program, and I don't know if you guys have any input on what that would look like. First is my first question. My second question is, we did allude to the charter schools themselves asking for this. I don't think we're making any decisions today, but I, for one, would like to have conversations with those charter schools. I want to know what they're thinking, because at the end of the day, I do believe that we're making decisions for them, and I want to have their input as well. So I don't know if you can give me more information on what does a guardian program look like?
Can I interject?
Yes.
Sheriff, can I just say one thing, Teresa? The board has no authority
Right,
to make a decision one way or the other for the charter school on this issue.
right.
They have autonomous authority to decide, do they want guardians or do they want to pay and have an SRO? What I'm hearing from the chief is, it's not just about payment.
It's
They
the
can't get the
corporations,
officers
of
to
course.
actually put them.
Right,
But I think it's very important we realize we're only talking about charter schools right now,
I
for which
understand that.
this board doesn't, you could have a policy like we'd really like this, which is what we've done in the
That's
past.
what we have
But
in
we
place.
can't impose it. And
Right.
we've had charter schools say to us in the past, they'd rather have guardians because they don't have to pay what they have to pay.
And Frank, they can
So
do
that's-
that today with
Yes.
our policy.
Right.
So
Although,
that's-
however, I know I have had parents from charter schools, and I sit on a charter school board, and so I would like to know, those are our students. So I need to know what that program is going to be like, even if it is just as a community member.
I'd just like to say, my son is in a charter school.
Mhm.
I've spoken in depth with Grady Judd, Wayne Ivy. They have over 112 or more guardians. They've had 0 incidents negatively involving a student versus guardian. Okay, so now, it's not like Chief says, we're gonna make sure that the qualified people are gonna be there. Right now, in Osceola County alone, we have about 6.5% of the veterans that are living here, that's over 1,100, that are unemployed. I don't know, you were a combat medic? Mr. District Chair was in the military, combat trained. You know, are you guys gonna sit here and tell me that if we screen, we process, we help the school district or the charter schools employ people with military backgrounds that are trained in combat with extensive anti-terrorism experience, they can't do a guardian job when they can secure our nation? You know, you gotta remember, it's not just a security guard we're looking for. We're looking for an individual that will go beyond just taking care of the children. They're gonna take care of everything, the teachers, the children, and I trust 100% just from looking at these other agencies that are implementing these guardian programs. If we screen and hire the right veterans, I'll tell you what, I'm 1,000% confident as a veteran myself, we'll be able to employ them and make sure they're gonna have the best qualified security personnel on their campus. And we will be 100% involved. We're gonna maintain all their certifications, but ultimately, it's gonna be up to the decision of the charter schools. And the director of the charter school that my son goes to wants a guardian, and it's because of the cost. They can put that 40, 50,000 back into hiring a teacher, into education, or programs to help compensate the money that they don't have to help those children become successful. So we gotta look at all avenues before we discount the guardian program altogether.
Mr. O'Grady, I know you had a point, and Mr. Bass, then I've got a quick comment on what you just said, Sheriff.
For one, is a guardian equal to a police officer?
they don't have the.
Certification.
They don't have the rights to arrest, but they're gonna be trained to
That's what,
handle the
you
situation.
don't have a response. That's what our Commissioner of Education said.
Is the Guardian program gonna guarantee that every guardian is a combat trained veteran?
We can,
We can't.
Yeah,
we can.
Oh,
there's a million people in our military. There's a huge number of them, other than basic training, haven't touched a gun. So, I mean, they're doing a lot of business type functions, so.
That's my question, and I think it just clouds the meaning of what I'm saying. It's just like you guys mentioned the program that it's the reality, right? You're hitting reality in year 3. I think that the reality in year 3 of a Guardian program, we don't know what it looks like, right? So the reality is what I would try to avoid. As a business person, 2 things that stick out is exactly that, is that now we're creating something else, and the reality of which we don't understand yet. And second, all the problems that you've mentioned are really, the city's problem, really. The city should be resolving these problems then, right? They should be allocating the proper budget so that you can do what's been requested so far. It's not, listen, we have $10, that pays for one guy, this one guy doesn't count, so we're going to shift in and we're gonna use this other guy who does not equal the same type of services, right? So I am very interested. I think that I think that this needs careful study. And you're also, when you bring in, let's say that everyone was a combat veteran, okay? Of which I am, okay? And I still think that you're gonna be creating issues that are unnecessary. Maybe that charter school does want it. I spoke to a charter school system, one of the largest in the country, and they said absolutely not. They don't want guardians, you know? And I'm also thinking about the parents. I think that this has also school choice implications where we're telling you, if you don't choose this school, then you're gonna have to worry, security is gonna become a decision-making process for you when you're putting your kid in school. And that just shouldn't be the case. Every parent should be allowed to pick the school of their choice, and in that process, they should know that their security is exactly the same, no matter where they go. And that's just, that may be philosophical, it may be the fact that I don't know anything about security, but, I'm obviously, I'm not speaking out against it. I'm sure that you can find a million veterans that are very happy to do this job and very, more than able to stop a bullet, but they may not be able to deal with a high school kid. And so, you know, that's the issue. I think it's complex. The burden that police officers have is the reason that they want them there, right? They're the guys that show up in a car accident, they deal with that stuff, they have become experts in taking care of people, right? You guys get all the bad press and everything, but in the end, everyone who's watching, everyone who lives here knows that cops take care of this community, right? And for now to say that cops are not they're gonna be taking care of the community, minus our kids, I think is a bad way forward.
Yeah, but we're not talking about putting guardians in high schools. We're just talking about charter schools. It's an option for them. Number 2, just so you guys have a little understanding of how law enforcement works, we learn all our tactics from the military. That's where we receive our SWAT training. That's where we receive our tactics to engage the public. Now, you have to soften it up when you're in the community, of course. And under the new police reform, a lot of people don't want to see, like he said about Mr. Crump, don't want to see cops on campus. So you don't speak for the majority of the community, because I've spoken to hundreds of people that want an option where it's going to be child-friendly, school-safe. You know, that's why we have to look at all these options. All the recommendations from this packet are beautiful. I mean, like I said, the same way they make their recommendations, people are going to have to understand other people and what they want. We can't just put our ideology on one person just because we feel personally a certain way. So, like you say, it's an open for discussion. We definitely need to speak with our charter school people and find out what exactly do they want. Hey, if 5 schools want them, 5 school charter gets a pilot program. You're talking about they have 1 or 2 schools, we have 16, you know, $50,000, $2-3 million. So there is a difference, and it has impacted us, and we still haven't recovered. And our main priority is to keep the whole county and community safe. So working together, us brainstorming, we're problem solvers. We're trying to come up with a way that's going to be feasible for everyone to make sure that everyone is getting police equally. Also, I've spoken to people who don't have kids. They hate kids. It's the reality, they're out there. And they don't want teachers in the schools, they want teachers protecting their car radio and their house. So, like I said, we have to really be open-minded when we do this, and we have to look at a perspective from everyone, how this is gonna work to benefit Osceola County in general.
Did I hear it correctly? I just want
Wait a second, I got Mr. Bass next, we'll try to come to you.
Simple question. Dr. Face, do we share SROs in certain situations? I'm thinking in my district, you've got Narcoossee Elementary and Middle is on a campus smaller than a high school campus. Can one SRO, it has to be individual? Because, I mean, the schools are right on top of each other. And when we're purchasing land with the intent of building a middle and elementary together. There's no way that you can't share.
Prior to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, the district was doing some sharing of SROs at elementary schools. So an SRO might split between 2 or 3 elementary schools. When I came on board, the board established as a priority that we would try to go back to 1 officer per school, and we were adding 1 or 2 or 3 each year, depending on the budget of the district and the sheriff and our local police agencies, in terms of where we were going with that. But with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, 7026, and then again in 7030, you must have one of the 4 options on every school campus every day that school is in session.
It just
We've
seems.
been not having officers for, say, for example, our summer camp programs or our extended day programs. There's currently an administrative rule proposed at the level of the state board that would require either an officer or a guardian or a school safety officer or a security guard anytime that instruction is happening. So that would require us to potentially contract with our agencies on an overtime basis for our Saturday morning remediation programs that we're doing right now and our more robust summer programs. So all of those things are coming, but they cannot share an officer, somebody has to be there.
It
And
just
that's
seems.
one of the complexities of the coverage that Chief Odell discussed. If somebody has to go to training, if somebody's on vacation, if somebody's out sick, if somebody has to go to court, then they have to find coverage.
Gotcha.
Or
Okay.
I have to send Lester.
What was Mr. Idell and Julius, and then Chief Dalton, I'll come to you.
Something I'd like to clarify, I believe somebody said the city manager and the county manager committed to this SRO thing. They need to remember that under Marjorie Stone Act, we didn't have a choice, okay? We were told you will put a school, officer in every school. We put 29 additional officers in the school. Our SROs are 16% of our workforce. That's 16%, 64 SROs that we don't have helping protect the entire community. And in response to, I don't want a combat veteran, I want a cop. I pray to God that every cop can do what he says he can do. I've been in a shooting before. But the officer at Parkland hid for 42 minutes, okay? So until you get in that situation, we can't guarantee anything. I pray to God that every officer can do it, but that's not saying they can. Most combat veterans, though, have experienced that. So, I believe we're cutting our veterans short when we say, well, I don't want them protecting our children. And it is a cost factor. I mean, it's a huge cost factor on the district. It's a huge cost factor on us. The county and the city manager do their best to balance the budget, but when the state mandated that we put those officers in that school, it wasn't a commitment. We were forced to, and we have to deal with that every year. So I think that's something we need to realize is, we need to look at alternatives.
And if my comments were in no way meant to, a knock on veterans. My comment was not all veterans are.
Yes, I'll come back, I understand.
That was, so. Wait a minute, let me go, let's try and keep some order. Julius, I think you wanted to say something, and Chief Dalton, then I'll come back to you.
This is for Dr. Case. When we first implemented Marjorie Stoneman and we negotiated the SRO contracts, I believe the charter schools were on the same plan as us and the same amount was distributed to each. When did that change, that allocation? Because now it looks like the charter schools individually negotiate with the SRO, but when we initially were implementing the program, and that was before I was on the board, that it was across the board, that the charter schools, like for instance, we pay $45,000 each, for instance. That amount was with the charter schools. then all of a sudden it broke, and now the charter schools are individually negotiating.
The charter schools paid more for us, all of us, I believe, from the onset. So because the charter school was considered more of a business, then they paid salary and benefits for a brand new officer. And so we did our contracts that way, unless we covered it with a detail, like an extra off-duty job. Then for us anyway, we only charged them the $45,000, the same as the school board. So they would have an officer every day, but it wouldn't be the same SRO. If we supplied them, and those were our 3 smaller, the other 4, we supplied them with an actual SRO, and they reimbursed us at a higher rate. The school board reimburses us for the public schools.
Okay, so, all right, then the other question is, I just wanna make sure it's clear, because I heard the sheriff say that we wanna make it optional, because what I was under the impression was, you wanna just not make it optional, you wanted to withdraw them. So, I just wanna make it clarified, you wanna withdraw them, or do you wanna make it optional, and those that can afford to do it, because we only reimburse you at 45,000 each officer. I understand that some schools are paying a higher rate, so it's like, if money's an issue, you wouldn't wanna cut off your person that's paying you more money. And so, is that something that you guys are open to negotiate with each charter school? Because that is a great point, you said one school only had like 45 FTE, they can't afford to pay you, so then, so is it truly optional, is that what I'm hearing? And say, okay, the smaller schools, they may have to go with the Guardian because they're only paying $8,000, and that makes sense, unless I'm hearing
From
different.
my perspective, it's not optional. We want to move to the Guardian. I would like to move to the Guardian program for all charter schools.
So I'm confused then, so.
Well, what I
sheriff saying one
meant to
thing,
say was, it's
is
not
that
that it's an
so
option,
what-
a lot of the
clarify.
people from the charter schools want to go to the Guardian. That's their option, it's their choice, and we're in agreement with them, and we're gonna help them transition to that if that's what they want.
Right, so the city of Kissimmee then doesn't wanna make it optional, the county's willing to make it optional if
No, if that's what they want, we'll go
if
with
that's
it.
what the charter wants.
I think it's optional now. They don't exercise that option, I suspect, because we've made a strong recommendation in the past. We'll provide you with an SRO.
And an example, and like a real life example is, we sit, Chairman Deck and I sit on the Four Corners Charter Board, and some of the parents were concerned, and that's in the county, that they're way out there in the middle of nowhere, and they're afraid that if they lose their SRO, that they won't be able to get a response in time from somebody to be there, because they're not like concentrated close to something.
We've looked into that too. The response time to charter schools are like, say we do 16. Our responses to public schools are thousands. So the response time for any request of an officer at charter schools is significantly lower. I don't know about your schools, but we're not getting the request for law enforcement for reports that they can't handle, that they have to have us there. So it is a big difference. And we have those calls for service numbers also.
Chief Conlon?
Thank you, Mr. Thacker. Let me go global for a minute, because there's been a lot of great recommendations, a lot of discussion. Everybody here is clearly on the same page as far as wanting the best for our schools and the children and the safety and security. Keep in mind as we go down this path that the operational impact on law enforcement is substantial. Many of our surrounding counties and departments, police departments, literally had to cannibalize existing units, operational policing units within their agencies to accommodate the state mandate as far as the security in the schools and putting SROs in there. We have massive growth that's projected. We're barely keeping up with it. Our agency, currently we have 4 charter schools in St. Cloud, potentially another one. The challenge there for us is a little bit less because we're handling it as an off-duty detail, so it doesn't have quite the impact, but across the board, the operational impact on the school. And again, I'm another case where we're in a little excess of 10% of our total workforce. We can't blame it on the cities. We can't blame it on the county administrations, because the city's got limited tax dollars as well to do a lot of things that they have to be able to do. And candidly, it does come down to a lot of budgetary issues. $45,000, $46,000 is not a whole lot of money considering what it costs us to put an officer or deputy into one of the schools, which is quickly approaching $140,000 on an annual basis when looking at our budget. So that becomes a lot of it, and the impact of us operationally is we're stretched thin. We're stretched very thin. And that's where you're starting to hear recommendations. I think in a perfect world, yes, we all want SROs in every school and things would be all there. The budget won't allow that, so we're having to find some creative ways to look at this objectively and having an honest conversation about how do we afford what we're doing so that we're not impacting that, because we can't afford to continue to pull operational staff out of the community. We've got to look at some alternatives, and I think it has to happen at a follow-up date, to have a lot more distance review of what the guardians are about versus what an SRO can do. And there's pros and cons to each one, but I think we've got to take a hard look at this because the impact is here. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be bringing this forward at this point.
You wanted to make a comment, and then Terry and Mike will come to you.
On the training for guardians, the state mandates specific training, firearms training, human diversity training. So it's not like we'd be putting, a veteran in or whoever, that guardian, not trained. There's annual requalifications, annual in-service training, and the law enforcement entities, sheriff's office and the police departments will interject themselves into that. Will be part of the threat assessments in the charter schools. And so there's, like Chief Odell said, there's still a very strong relationship. And one other thing I want to point out is about like the county manager and the city manager. A lot of this isn't about money, it's about resources. It's about being able to get that police officer. In this day and age, it's become so difficult to hire and retain police officers. And like Chief Odell had said, that it takes a year to get an officer in the schools. So we have to look at that. And Sheriff Lopez had said that, where do we reallocate our resources? I mean, for our agency, when you look at the charter schools, they're less than 13% of our calls for service for schools. They're less than 2%, not even 2% of our total calls for service. So the sheriff has to look at that when we have we have shootings, we have robberies, we have street racers. There's so many areas in the county that he is responsible for. So it's important that we look at our resources and say, how can we best serve the entire community? And if we don't have this conversation, I think we're irresponsible, and then not looking at these things. And that's
Thank you. I guess my main concern, first of all, let's be clear, this is a partnership and we have to work together and we have to be open to the conversation. I will repeat it again, there's no one present here that was more against having guardians in a school than I was. It's proven, it's on tape, right? But I work in talent management, I understand attrition, I understand training, I understand having to move people, and I'm also a mom. So I understand wanting to have the most capable people protecting our children who happen to also be citizens of our county. We're not gonna come to a consensus today because we don't have enough information. I really want to know how these guardians are gonna be trained, not so much where they're coming from. I think that conversation has happened, although I'm still unclear about that. Who's training them? And one of the reasons in the past that I was against having guardians was because although there is training, there's some training that's missing that I think is important for our guardians to have, that SROs are required to have. That was one of my main issues. And I want to know if we're going to be able to maybe voluntarily offer some of that training. I don't have, both descriptions in front of me, and I apologize for not having that top of mind, but those are the questions that I have. I don't think we're deciding anything today. We're opening up a conversation that it should be very public, and it is, and I'm grateful for that. But there's a lot of things that I want to know, and I also want to hear from the charter schools. I mean, at the end of the day, we're responsible. I think we're responsible for all students, but their voice is missing here. And I don't know if it's possible to include them somehow in the conversation. I mean, I'm willing to talk to them myself, but I do want to, if we have a decision made as a community, this is a community decision. It's really not a school board decision at the end of the day. They have the option to go to use guardians. That has been stated several times. I want to make sure that I am the most informed as possible. So those are the things that I would ask I'm specifically concerned about training. Who's providing the training? What's the training going to be like? What's the jurisdiction? These are big questions that I have. You know, and I'm especially concerned about what the people who are going to be affected by this change are saying. I'm done, yes.
Mike?
So I just want to clarify, for the city at least, I can't talk for St. Cloud, I can't talk for the county, but if the decision was made that we stick with officers in every school, and that meant logistically we had to add 4, 5, 6 additional officers to overstaff for the logistics of how charter schools work and how they open, we can afford to do it. I can figure out a way to do it. It's not a money issue. It's a resource issue, just as Dan said, because the bottom line is, I'll give you an example. There was a charter school, 750, 800 students, almost a full-size elementary school in Tapestry. They got their building permit in February. They were CO'd just in August, right before the school opened. So we're in the same fiscal year, so we can't add an officer that quickly. So we pull somebody off of our patrol to fill that position. And then to go through the process of hiring, as the chief said, to get that permanent officer in there to augment the numbers of people that we had to take from in other areas, it takes a year. So it's really just about the timing issue and the resource issue. And if at the end of the day, the decision is, because my commission may decide that they want SROs in every school as well, and we'll continue to do it. But really, it's more of an issue to me of resources and what's the best use for taxpayer resources. The decision is we need to overstaff our personnel in our police departments to address these potential situations where we have vacations and sick and people leaving the agency, which we do in patrol. We can do that. It's just, at the end of the day, what makes the most sense.
Just one thing real quick, John, if you don't mind. We're approaching 10 o'clock, and then I'll come back to you, but let me just throw out the possibility of maybe a game plan here, because I think we are starting to get a little circular.
Yeah.
Couple things, maybe then we get back together. One, we've got a charter school department in the school district. I think that might be a good place to rally the troops for the charter schools. See if they can come up with a spokesman or 2 or 3 or 4, or a committee, however they want to do it, that could come back to this group and talk to this. Number 2, what would really help me would be for the 3 departments to get together, come up with a pretty concise presentation on what a guardian is, what does a guardian look like, and how do you find them, and how do you employ them. I think you.
I'm sorry, can I ask a point of clarification there? Would you mind if we brought in somebody that is oversight
Sure.
from another?
Yep, however you all want to put together,
Be ideal, actually.
it could really explain to us so we can, because I don't understand it. 3, you've got, my sense is from this conversation, you've got a majority of board members right now that are not for guardians. You've got to convince us how they are just as well trained as an officer. I understand your resource issues. I understand we've had several people say it's not a money issue. If you can find these people from guardians, I'd like, and I don't want it now, but explain to me why, if we can find all those people, why can they not become part of the forces, the police forces, sure, what the difference is in that. So I don't know if that makes sense. We're going to kind of wrap up. I know John's got a comment, but then we'll.
Yeah, I just wanted to state a couple of things. One, we have a tax that will be sunsetting here in the near future, and if I imagine we're gonna be asking for that to be extended, right, Dr. Pace? That would be your guidance at this stage, right? So we're gonna ask for taxes for buildings, but we're not gonna ask for more taxes for child security. I think that's, again, a bad way forward. Secondly, I just wanna comment on something that was stated here, that there are people who have care more about their car radio than kids. I'd like to meet that person, and I hope that they're not gonna apply for a job at the district. And secondly, we have $8,000, an $8,000 budget some schools are paying into the system. So if they're paying $8,000, they can't afford a police, then they're gonna attribute that budget to a guardian. So we can already imagine that somebody's acting, right now we have a Mercedes with a police officer, now we're gonna get, I don't know, a Yugo, right? So guarding our kids. And the other thing is just, I'd like to know the list of schools that are okay with the guardians, because number one, just if I owned a school and I say, hey, I don't want cops at school, I want a charter, I want a guardian, I think that's bad marketing. And then lastly, I just wanna say that, Deputy Ado, that, in terms of a shootout, I've also been in a shootout, I've been in many shootouts actually, some that have lasted 13 hours. Not everyone in the shootout is qualified to be in a school. It's a different temperament, okay? And that cop, I think that veterans make the best cops, but there are some veterans who are not cops. And there are some veterans who have a lot of troubles and a lot of issues after the war, okay? I think it's gonna be a very tough situation to fulfill the expectations of parents that they have their kids safe under all circumstances. And that's our obligation, right? It's our obligation to ensure that kids are safe in school at all times, no matter what we do. So I'm glad that you had mentioned that we can find the money, because I think that we can. It's not like we have the greatest traffic or the greatest street or the greatest transportation system here, Maybe some allotment from a system that's really doing bad and put it towards something that's even more important than traffic, which is our kids, might be a good use of resources. And I'm not sure, I have 5 kids, I know I've spent a lot of resources on those kids, much more than I have on a radio.
Chief Odell, do you want to say something too?
Just one more thing to add.
Chief
Oh,
Odell,
so sorry.
let him
Go
go
ahead.
first, and then I'll come back to you, and then we're gonna try and wrap it.
I just wanted to say, we're certainly, coming from a different place than we were 3 years ago, and we've got close relationships with our neighboring agencies that have successful programs. So we're not blindly entering, putting a Yugo, and I love your passion, so I hear you, but that's not what we're looking for either. We want to be part of the process and have some influence over the charter schools if we get to this point. But I want to remind everybody that these kids, who we love and want to keep safe, are in their homes and their communities for twice as many hours as they are in the schools. And so if they go home and their communities aren't safe because we've pulled our resources, what have we accomplished? So I'll leave that.
Ms. Castillo, and then we're gonna,
Yes, so
I believe, unless, do you have
Just
something?
one additional thing, and actually that goes with your point as well, Chief Odell, is I love data, and we actually do have 3 years of data on guardian programs, because there have been some neighboring counties who have done it. So if we can, I don't know who can find that for me, I would love to see what the results have been of having guardian programs for the past 3 years, because that data does exist.
Dr.
For the
Payne?
record, there are 43 counties now that have a guardian program out of 67.
Okay.
I know we went around in circles a good bit today, but I think we did make some progress. I think if we can take maybe these 4 or 5 points and circle back in the next couple of weeks, I'd like to do this. I don't want to drag this out for 6 months. I'd like to bring this to a head, within the next 30, 45 days. We got school starting just around the corner. So if we can move with that, I'll ask the superintendent to work with y'all on some
I was gonna
dates.
say, did you want to look at dates?
So,
I don't know that.
Send a couple?
yeah, let's do that.
Does morning work for everyone? Evening, what's the, morning is good?
Morning worked pretty well, yeah.
Okay.
So, Frank,
Mr. Chairman, we're in the midst of working on the SRO contracts, because they'll be expiring, we need to do it, so
Sure.
could, working with these recommendations.
those are not board
I was about to
recommendations
say,
at
at the
this
next
point.
board meeting, could we agenda and have the board give me authority on which ones or which not? Because for us to sit down and work through the agreement and not know whether this is coming back or not is.
My hunch is there's some recommendations that'll make it, and there's some in there that won't. Probably some of them, from my standpoint, are school board authority versus somebody else's authority. It can be an ask.
Agenda it for the next meeting?
Yeah, we gotta figure out how to get through 20 of those in some reasonable amount of time in a
Can
board
we-
meeting, so.
Can we workshop it?
Yeah, you could workshop and do
Or-
it there, and I'd have guidance.
Yeah, we could do that at a workshop.
Let's do
I
I
that,
will
'cause I-
resend everybody both documents, the one that,
I don't-
reviewed version for today as well as the full one, and I'll make sure that all of you get a copy as well of both documents.
Anything else before we,
One last thing, I did ask for body cam for all the SROs, just so you know. So I'm pro body cam for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, realistically, it is costly, and it boils down to the taxpayers, comes out of that.
Sure.
So just so everybody knows.
going once, going twice?
Clarence, were we gonna go over you mentioned the increase?
With those costs.
Or do you wanna-
I think we all know that that's the issue. I think in the list of things I was talking about, I'm hoping that's gonna come back as part of when you're justifying why the guardians, that to me is a piece of that conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Stand adjourned, and try again. Keep working through.